Well, I'm super excited to introduce our speaker. Jason Smith Jason and Paulina have been close friends of Susanna and I for many, many years. In actual fact, I think we know them from even before they got married, which, when you look at them, is not that long ago. But anyway, it is. And Jason has an amazing story as someone who has built a thriving business, but at the same time, also all along the journey, he's been someone who's been passionate for the kingdom of God. And this is really the combination, right, that we should all live. Pretty much everybody here in the room has got a day job, but in reality, in this, God wants to extend his kingdom wherever we are. So the idea is that church actually breaks all barriers and gets into every neighborhood and every workplace and every family and every friendship group. And so Jason is someone who's got very rich experience with that. He's a well-known author. I remember one time I actually walked off a plane and there was Jason, but he was like on this very big sign in the airport bookshop. He's been on television as well, lots and lots of things, but he's like a super nice guy, and so is Paulina. So why don't we welcome them here to our church? Thank you.
Wow, what a generous introduction, hey? Hey, it's good to see a church full on a Sunday morning. They're not all like that, so don't take that for granted, thank you. But it's great to see you guys. I've got a few friends that I've already connected to in the audience this morning, so that makes me feel at home. And I've made a few new friends already, which is nice, so hopefully by the end of the day, we'll all have had a chance to have a quick touch of base. I've been to your church once before. It's easy to get invited once. It's a lot harder to get invited back. It only took Marcus like 3 years or 2.5 years to offer the introduction. I said to Paulina, I couldn't have offended too many people because they're letting me come back. She said, oh, maybe they just want you to apologise for what you did last time. So, hey, the good news is I'm not here to preach a sermon. I'm not here to give you some deep theological stuff, because that's not really me. Marcus said, don't do any of that. Don't embarrass yourself. Just tell your story. Just tell your story. And it's your summer, your summer Sunday or your summer service, your family day. So what a privilege to be with you on what we hope will be a really sunny afternoon out there together. But here's the thing. I just want to encourage you with a little bit of my story on this simple thought, and that is to trust in the story that God is writing. If your life was a book, can you trust in the story that God is writing? So to start this, it's always hard to know where to start your story. Have you ever thought about that? When you get to know someone really quickly in a short amount of time, it's like, what do you say? How do you introduce yourself? Well, I want to take you back 8 years to Fiji. Beautiful, sunny morning, calm waters. I was about 15 nautical miles off Plantation Island. Anyone been to Fiji? Beautiful. It's our spiritual home. We had our honeymoon there and we've been back many times. And I'd just done a 2-dive excursion, scuba diving. I'd been drifting along a place called Wilkie's Wall, which is a beautiful coral reef about 20 metres below the waterline. We had plunged into a Gotham City, which is called that because of all the batfish that dart in and out of the shadows and the caves. And I surfaced and gulped dry air for the first time in 43 minutes. And I was excited. I was invigorated. I couldn't wait to get back to the resort to tell Paulina all about my morning adventures. What a way to start the day. And as I walked up to the kids and found Paulina in a hammock, and I'm like trying to tell her all the stories of my underworld adventure, she didn't look that well. And she greeted me with this sentence, now Jace, relax, it'll be okay, but there's some problems at home. Now, that's not a nice greeting. My mind fractured in all directions at that point, thinking about all the tragedies that could be happening in our business back at home. But she handed me my phone. There were 24 missed calls. 4 of them from the guy who I had left in charge, 2 from my lawyer, and 1 from my mum. And as I tapped the email link and saw the headline of the article that morning in the Sydney Morning Herald, and please don't Google it because you only add to the hits, but it said, "Hell on earth, back in motion, Physio franchisees bullied and trapped." It's okay, it was only syndicated to a readership of 8 million people. And as I read that news article that morning and had all these allegations of misconduct levelled against me, the fact that they weren't true didn't matter. Reading them in a credible national newspaper gave them weight. And I immediately became certain of 3 things. Number 1, I was about to lose my business. Number 2, whatever little reputation of good standing I might have had was about to evaporate. And number 3, I have no idea, God, what you are doing in my story. Can we trust in the story that God is writing in our lives? God is a much better storyteller than me, but here's the thing. He rarely reveals the plot when he starts the chapter. And so I felt incredibly anxious, incredibly uncertain. I often describe myself when I do introduce to new people. I'm a passionate physiotherapist, but I'm a failed medical missionary. I am a reluctant businessman. I am something of an accidental CEO who's had far more failures with just a couple of successes along the way. And it's interesting because the story that my life represents is not the story I would have written. And my story is unique. And my story is special, but no more unique and no more special than yours. You want your story to be special to you. But the question is, can we trust God in the story when it's not making sense and it's not following the plot that we thought we would be living? So I've taken you to Fiji 8 years ago. I'll come back to that. I won't leave you hanging. I did share this with someone once and never finished that story, and they had a couple of sleepless nights and ended up ringing me back to get closure. I'll give you some result on that. But let me go back even further to when I was a 10-year-old boy. Hadn't really grown up in a Christian home, but mum and dad and my sister, myself, at about my age of 10, started to get invited to church, just like maybe some of you this morning. And my Saturday morning routine was the Cartoon Connection. And in the early 80s, while the rest of the household was asleep and I'm plonked in the brown vinyl beanbag with Vegemite and peanut butter on toast, and I'm watching the cartoons interjected between Roadrunner and Bugs Bunny, if you remember, were very confronting World Vision adverts that started for the first time to appear. And they were pictures of these frail little Ethiopian children. This is a whole new genre of TV, right? And you would see their swollen heads and distended bellies and their frail limbs, and they would sort of struggle to walk toward the camera, and then they would collapse into a cloud of dust in the dirt as a malnourished cow on cue kind of walked in the background, and a celebrity would go full face to camera, and for a cup of coffee a day you could sponsor a child. You remember these ads? Well, I'm 10 years old. I don't understand the art of marketing or the call to action or the appeal of using these hooks to try and drive you to certain behaviours. I'm just sitting there thinking, where are their parents? Like, why aren't the doctors and the nurses just fixing these little kids? Like, why can't they just walk into a supermarket and get some food? And I'm distressed. As a little boy who doesn't have the maturity to reconcile everything that's going on, I don't even know where Ethiopia is. For all I'm aware, it's just the next suburb, around the corner and out of sight. But because I'm having this early awakening that there is a God, I make a deal. I make a pledge in my little boyish heart when I should have been preoccupied with skateboards and Ataris, if you remember those. I make a deal with God, let's fix this. How about I become a doctor and a medical missionary, and I go work amongst the poorest of the poor, and we go fix this problem. And something hooked into my spirit. I would describe it really as the first defining moment of my life, and I'm just a little boy. But it shaped the next 8 years of my schooling. Like if you asked anybody who knew me at the time, who does Jason want to grow up and become? Put them under a heat lamp at 3 a.m, sleep deprived, interrogate them, and they will all come up with a consistent response because I was so conspicuous about what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a missionary. I wanted to work amongst the poorest of the poor. And I felt like this was what God's story for my life would become. I was starting to prepare the chapter outlines for this life book that metaphorically you could imagine we sometimes preempt. Medical missionary. Well, I failed, didn't get into medical school, became a physiotherapist instead, thought I could still fulfill that mandate by working in an allied health capacity. Met Paulina. Paulina's an intensive care nurse. What a package deal. Hey? So here I am thinking, great Lord, so we get married, we're in our early 20s, we go to Cambodia, we make a few trips overseas, and this whole idea of becoming medical missionaries looked like it's imminent, but every door was locked, every window was shut. I couldn't break it open if I wanted to. There were no opportunities to go full time in that capacity. That was a low point. I'm understating it. It was a massive disappointment. Because for nearly a decade, I had conditioned myself to believe this is who I will become. This is what God's going to do in and through me. This is my story. And the question again is, can we trust in the story God is writing for our lives? Can you believe it? I had to go and get a job. I had to go and work at the Royal Melbourne Hospital and do a 9 to 5. Paulina was doing 12-hour shifts in the same hospital in the intensive care unit. All the while thinking this is temporary. This is just this is like a side track. We will get back to our life purpose. We will get back to our mission. It was about this time, and not to embarrass Mike and Marion, but they're sitting right here with us. I can't ignore them. They're like right there. But it was about this time that Mike and Marion came into our life, and Mike's got his own story, but he started to encourage me and compel me that it's less about what we do and it's more about who we become. That God is far more interested in using your circumstances to shape you, to teach us, to train us. And whilst I wanted to learn all of his business tips and tricks, because that's kind of, that was why I was first introduced to him, he was far more interested in discipling me in just being full of faith and trust that God has your story in hand. He's still working on me. I think I'm his hardest project yet, but 25 years on, it's amazing to think how we can still get lost in the presumption of what we think our life should become. So at 20 5, I quit my job at the hospital. Paulina's still putting food on the table and paying our mortgage and doing the hard yards. And I start a small little physio practice in the garage at home, out in Scoresby, if you're familiar. And it's not meant to be a global domination strategy, right? This is pocket money. This is a side hustle until the missionary opportunity comes good, until God finally wakes up and realizes we're okay, we're good for it. And that little business grew, and within a couple of years, we had 5 staff. We had, about $1 million revenue, which is not insignificant in a small home-based kind of cottage industry. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no commercial instincts, really. In fact, when we met and married, I promised Paulina I'd never start a business. I wouldn't want that stress in our home. So this was not my plan. And it became so all-consuming and so derailing, really, of my time and energies and efforts that I got to the point where I actually felt like this was not of God. This was distraction. This is something I want to pack up and bury. I would have given it to you if you had asked. And so I did what any sane person in that situation would do. I went across the street and got my neighbour to shave my head, then bleached the very little bit of hair that was left. We bought a combi van. I gave the keys of the practice to a Kiwi who had only been in the country a couple of months. I said, good luck, hope it works. And we took off around Australia to rediscover God's calling on our life. That's responsible, isn't it? That makes perfect sense. It's a logical, it's a proportionate response to what I would describe as my quarter-life crisis. Why wait till your 40s to crash and burn? And so in our mid-20s, we're driving around Australia trying to discover where we went wrong. Why, God, do we not qualify for the mission field? Why are we not found suitable or worthy for the story I am convinced you are trying to write in the book of my life? He writes much better stories than me. He just doesn't always reveal the plot at the beginning of the chapter. And so we were halfway around Australia, and we were walking along the beach up in Darwin. We'd just come out of Kakadu. We weren't talking, but we were enjoying a big electrical storm that was brewing on the horizon. So the sky is just a kaleidoscope of colour, and I am internally having one of the worst moments in my inner world. I'm complaining to God. I'm disappointed. I'm disillusioned. I'm feeling like I've been totally looked over. And I feel like God spoke to me very clearly. It's one of the most memorable encounters I have had in my life with God. And he didn't give me an instruction, and he didn't give me a lot of detail, and it didn't go for very long, but it was very profound. He gave me a choice. God said, okay, Jace, enough with all the whining. If you want to go to the mission field, you have my blessing. And in a moment I thought, yes, I had strong-armed and out-negotiated the God of the universe. But you know when you send a text and you know they're reading it and you get the ... it's like they're thinking about how they're going to reply. It's like in my mind's eye, I could see ... in the sky. He hadn't finished. He had given me a choice. I could go to the mission field. Or? What do you mean or? There's no alternative. This is the life story I am committed to. Or, he said, you could trust me to do it a different way. He said you could go home to Melbourne. You could learn the business of healthcare. You could build a national brand on an ethical business model that could scale to not just send you and Paulina. You could send tens, maybe hundreds, even thousands of others if you were prepared to trust in the story that I'm writing for your life. And it was a compelling alternative. Not because it was my idea, not because I even liked what that promised, but because I got a glimpse that God hadn't looked me over, that he was doing something in the unseen world, that where my confusion and my disillusionment had been rooted, he was actually bringing hope that I hadn't lost my way. And I don't know you all. I don't know where you're at. I don't know what chapter in your life book you're living right now. But my gentle encouragement is, can you trust in the story that God is writing? And what might feel like a chapter of disappointment, or what might feel like a plan you never anticipated, could well be God gently nudging you. You're on track as you continue to trust in where he steps you. You know, I've learned over the years, and, you know, Paulina, as this is true, I'm sure, for every marriage, reserves the right to tell her own story from her own perspective, and of course to correct mine when I get the details wrong. But one of the things that we have tried very hard over these big life moments to do is not to make unilateral decisions. And so we might wrestle it out, we might argue it through, but we want to hear from God separately, and we want to trust in how he's bringing our stories together collaboratively, right? And that day we resolved we would do it God's way. So Paulina drove most of the way back from Darwin in our combi van, and I laid or sat or, just spent my moments filling an exercise book with the ramblings of a madman, like 80 pages of just every idea or possibility or how we could do physio differently in the Australian context. And of course, as we look back now, we can see some of that was the inspiration of the Holy Spirit as we trusted in what his story would be. And, I want to encourage you that calling gets talked about a lot, but calling often unfolds over time. And so what we're asked is not to make an informed decision on all the details up front, but we're asked to trust that God has our lives in hand. And it's always clearer in hindsight. So we got home, we begged, borrowed. We didn't steal, did we, Paulina? But we begged, we borrowed every dollar we could and every bit of advice we could. Great mentors got around us. I can see some of them in the room. And John Sycamore and Suzanne were amongst them. And Marcus and Susanna were great cheerleaders. And just other people would just urge us on in this story. But we had to get on with learning what it was to build a business on kingdom principles. And I cast a big vision. I felt like God said 100 practices around Australia. It hadn't been done in Physio before, but I felt like that would be the economic engine that he would use to be able to propel his missions agenda. So we went from one practice that had survived our escape around the country, we went very quickly to 6. I think in our biggest, fastest growing year, we did 14 practices in 1 year. That's more than one a month. I don't recommend it. But we were having accidental expansions interstate as we just tried to hold on to the back of this rocket as it was launching away, not really in control of everything that was going on, but trusting in the story that God was writing. And wouldn't it be awesome if actually the rest of this story was just, praise God, everything worked, one thing led to another, and we're both here smiling today, encouraging you. We had burglaries where there was a series, there was one pesky little petty crime thief who just burgled every one of our practices night after night after night, stealing all of our TVs and all of our computer equipment from the front desks. Like, it was he had been set on his own mission. We had servers full of all of our patient details, running a network at this stage of about 50 locations, blow up one evening, and all of the confidential medical histories evaporate into the ether, and me trying to run a network of businesses with no information at hand until we could somehow find a restore. We had staff who would betray us and steal money, and these are predictable stories. Anyone in business? Anyone got some sort of war stories? This is kind of the cut and thrust of trying to make your way in the world. I had universities who I was a lecturer on staff at who would blacklist me because they didn't want the graduates going straight into private practice, and we had this voracious appetite for new staff, and so we were battling on all fronts. I had registration boards come at us because you're not meant to advertise healthcare. It's actually illegal to have testimonials, and we had elite athletes who were spruiking us in their areas of influence. So it was like everywhere I turned, if I was looking at it through a natural lens, I'm like, this shouldn't be my story. This is not meant to be. This isn't flowing. It's not going easy. It was hardship after setback, after disappointment, and I would go back. I would be tethered to that moment on the beach in Darwin where God said, hey, can you trust me? Can you trust in my story? But nothing tested me more than that fateful morning in Fiji. So you're back with me? Only 8 years ago. We had about 100 locations at that point, maybe a few more. And this was a well-earned, well-deserved break. And God, you've been faithful. You've got us this far. I think I can buy into your narrative. And then it looks like the whole thing is about to blow up. We had just expanded into New Zealand. And in fact, I thought, God, you've probably got this now. We can just coast this one through to the end. And then I surface from my dive, dripping wet, facing what feels like a insurmountable challenge. The adverse media led to a whole cohort of what we thought were loyal franchisees rebelling against the brand. That, of course, fed into a bigger scandal at the time, and you don't need to know the details, but 7-Eleven and Caltex and a whole bunch of other franchises were being put under scrutiny, and so there was a parliamentary inquiry into misconduct in the franchising sector, and we got sucked into that vortex. The fear that it would all collapse was real. And we would pray about this in our board meetings, and I would try to trust God in the story. But there were days where I didn't do so well. It was hard. And you'll be pleased to know it only took 3 years for vindication, for the Senate to publish their report, to, wipe our slate clean, to give us, in fact, an honorary recommendation or commendation in their report that we were beyond reproach. It only took 3 years in trusting that God had our story in hand to bring us full circle, and not only have endured that season, but to have materially grown our business and retained every one of those franchisees. That, though, led to an ACCC inquiry because others just thought, there's got to be something buried in the dirt. There's got to be some skeletons in the closet. So we spent another 2 years fighting the ACCC. Full vindication. So then the ATO had to go. They thought there must be some tax dodgers here. And we eventually got a clean bill of health from them. But can you see how the tests didn't get easier? They got bigger. Because God's refining me. He's not interested in the brand. He's not interested in the business of physiotherapy. It was a big revelation when I realised that when we go to heaven, you're not going to need any physiotherapists, right? There's nothing eternal about the business. He's interested in who we are and who we're becoming. And here's the thing. If calling unfolds slowly over time, can you agree with me that pressure shapes purpose? A lot of the chapters I wish are not part of my story were the ones that God used the most to shape who I am. And I wouldn't say this to too many people, so let's just keep this amongst us, right? I'm kind of grateful for it now. At the time, Paulina, Mike, I don't think I was very grateful. I think I had some other words, right? But now I see what it has invested into me. A trust in a God who is bigger than my circumstances, who has a blueprint for my life that I could never have imagined, and that it's not punishment, these seasons of hardship that you and I face, they're preparation. So I don't know what chapter you're in right now, but it is an Agatha Christie novel, right? It is an adventure. There are meant to be plot twists because he is a master author. The question is, can we trust in the story that he's writing? If our lives was a book, spoiler alert, but you're not at the end yet. Okay? Don't mind how old you are. Some of us are a little further toward the end, but none of you have got to the final chapter, or you just wouldn't be here, right? And so there's room for God to maneuver. The best stories, the movies we love the most, are the ones with that surprise factor that gets our attention at the end. We eventually got to about 140 locations across Australia and New Zealand. And with that, lots of complexity. And you might recall there was this little virus that floated through town called COVID-19. And I'm sensitive to this because a lot of people, a lot of businesses experienced enormous pain during that season. And I know people today who lost close to everything and haven't yet recovered. So I don't say this glibly. But that season for us, whilst it was busy and it was complicated and there were difficulties, for reasons I can't fully explain, we grew 25% during COVID. We were still launching new bricks and mortar locations in suburbs that were locked down. And it really just felt like God's miraculous hand on what we were doing. But because of that growth, we got the opportunity to meet a lot of people who wanted to buy our business. And it's a story for another day because it would take all the time I've already given to the preamble. But a series of what Paulina and I could only describe as divine moments, things we could never have engineered, we would never even have imagined to have prayed for it, to be able to claim credit that at least we asked, happened. Month after month, in the final year of COVID, we ended up structuring a deal that saw us listed on the ASX through a backdoor strategy and the beginnings of an exit for Paulina and me. And as we kind of signed and inked those documents, we reflected on our story because it's a moment. And we realised that in the building of physiotherapy practices and trying to do things God's way and struggling against all these challenges of which I've only given you little elements of, we realised God had used us for his mission. We had helped build hospitals in Burma. We'd helped dig wells in parts of India. We were part of church planting initiatives throughout Southeast Asia. Paulina especially felt compelled around vulnerable children, and so we did a lot of work with kids who were being trafficked. We saw land bought and safe houses built in countries where young children had experienced more in the first 5 years of their life than you and I could imagine, the traumas. We were seeing the gospel being Trojan horsed into a lot of those initiatives. We were helping women who were being trafficked across the borders. We were working with our Indigenous people. For 10 years, we flew in and out of Arnhem Land and Palm Island, if you've heard of Palm Island, which is on par with Bangladesh in terms of its level of poverty. And we would take 80 workers, nurses, physios, women's health specialists, diabetes educators into these remote homeland communities and try and move the needle on closing their physical life gap, but also introducing them to Jesus. For more than 10 years, kind of without us realising it, it snuck up on us in ways we couldn't have planned it. God had positioned us to be medical missionaries. It's not how I would have written the story, because my 9 to 5, or those of you in business, my 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. daily grind, right, was working the marketplace, dealing with bills to be paid and growth strategies and budgets and a few difficult people along the way. But God all along had been true to that calling that he had captured my heart around as a little 10-year-old. It was medical missions, but just a different shape, on a different timeline, but no less fulfilling and no less impactful. And in fact, the genius of God's books are that we could never claim the credit. Like, all the glory goes to him because it's his masterful stroke of the pen that brings out miraculous things that I sometimes don't even believe my own story. It's that strange. So I used to think it was business or mission. And then I started to come along with the idea I could do both, business and mission. And then as we started to make some money and bank the checks, it's like maybe business is for missions. Until the real truth landed, business in this context is missions, because it's God's idea. It's God's idea. It was God's mission all from the beginning for his purposes, even if it wasn't the way I would have told the story. So as I kind of just wind this up, really, if you've caught the thematic here, I'm just an accidental success. I didn't plan any of it. And if I had, it would have looked really different. And I mean that sincerely. It's not how I would have written the book. And it's a God story, not a Jason story, not a Paulina story. Jesus is the main character. And this isn't theory now. This isn't just good theology, although I believe that to be true. This is our lived experience. This is what I get to share and encourage others with. It's not about business strategy. You know, people ask me often, how did you grow a franchise from 0 to 100? And how did you do that so easily? Right? And of course, it's not about those things. It was Jesus who first forgave us, steadied us, guided us, called us. He's the one who wrote the chapters when we wouldn't have survived. And so when I look back now, the garage startup and the personal burnout in my 20s and those media headlines and all the financial strain and the growth and then the exit and all the missions initiatives and the impact it has on us and our family, when I look at all of that, kind of really do accept that the hardest chapters, the ones I wished weren't written, were the most important ones. And some of you are in a great chapter right now. Like, you don't want this chapter to end. Just read slowly. Okay? Because it's just all flowing. It's congruent. It's a season. And enjoy it. That's God's favour and that's God's provision. It's also God's preparation. Because what we know to be true of every hero in the Bible is their seasons are like an ECG chart. Do you want a flat line? Or do you want the ebbs and flows, the ups and downs, the peaks and troughs? And it's in these seasons that God's actually doing something beautiful. And if God really is who he says he is, a God of love, a wise God, a faithful God, someone who is sovereign, then no chapter is wasted. And he reserves the right to author the story. So no delay is accidental, no detour is meaningless. I could imagine your story is a spellbinder, a page turner, if you can trust in God to continue what he's started. Just recently, I was in India and working with some local churches, and just for fun, through a translator, I think it'll go a little easier with you, but with a translator, I tried to compel them with this idea. I'm just a nobody who met or discovered an incredible somebody who died for everybody, and our job is to tell anybody, right? So Jesus is the main character of our story. And so regardless of where you are today, no judgment from me, you've heard a taste of all my failures, right? I'd encourage you to ask more questions about God. I don't know where you're at, but be an inquiring mind. Be curious. Ask questions about God. And those of you who are especially bold, ask God to reveal himself to you. Some of you, church is an occasional experience, and you're really welcome. Like I said, it's only my second time here. So we're in good company. But ask God to reveal more of himself to you. So just in closing, calling. Calling unfolds over time. Hindsight's a beautiful thing. Be patient with your story. Pressure shapes purpose. The chapters you want to delete are some of the most important ones. And success, if we want to use that word, is really faithfulness. It's not what you build, it's not your scale, it's not your business, it's not your achievements. It's remaining faithful and putting our trust in God. Who we become and who we bless is far more important to him than what we build or what we do. So, we all have a story. It hasn't been finished. It's in the making. Can you trust God in your story? And I hope you can. Let me just finish with this benediction over you. And this is Paul, the Apostle Paul, writing to one of the earliest churches, what I think is timeless. This is like as real for us today as it was for them. You'll find this in Ephesians 3:20. It says, "Now to him who is able to do exceedingly, abundantly above all you could ask or think, according to the power that works in us. To him be the glory in the church by Christ Jesus to all generations forever and ever. Amen." Bless you.